Welcome back to another episode of the CSK8 podcast. My name is Jared O'Leary. Each week of this podcast is either an interview with a guest or multiple guests, or a solo episode where I unpack some scholarship in relation to computer science education. In this week's particular episode, I'm interviewing a repeat guest, Bob Irving. In this new interview with Bob, we discuss Bob's book, which is titled Hard Fun: Supercharge Your Middle School Computer Science Classroom with Project-Based Hands-On Just-in-Time Learning. We discuss learning computer science through Minecraft, the impact of COVID on Bob's teaching, the importance of interest-driven learning, the future of computer science education, and so much more. As always, you can find show notes at jaredoleary.com or by clicking the link in the app that you're listening to this on. For example, you can find some of the podcasts that were mentioned, like Bob's previous interview and then the interview with Laura DeSenza, linked to in the show notes. You'll also find hundreds, if not thousands, of free computer science education resources on my website, as well as on the website for the nonprofit that I work for, Boot Up PD, which powers this podcast. And if you're on my website, you'll also find a bunch of gaming and drumming content, because I stream and create content in those areas too, in my leisure. So if those interest you, check it out. But with all that being said, we will now begin with an introduction by Bob.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Bob Irving, and I teach middle school computer science. And I teach in an independent school in Charleston, South Carolina, called the Porter Gowd School. And I've been there. This is my 8th year. And I did it for about 11 years before that in another independent school. And this is, believe it or not, my last year full-time in-person teaching. So I'll be moving on to whatever the next phase is after this. I did finally, after 2 years of teaching remotely and a pandemic and everything else that happened, I finally finished my book, which has come out. And I was on the show. Jared had me very graciously a couple of years ago. And he said, well, when you get your book out, let me know. We'll talk about it. So it's out. If this were on video, you could see me holding it up to the camera. I look at it, it's only really about 61 pages. It's surprising that it took me all that time to finish it. But anyway, I wanted to get it out, and I wanted to kind of put down in writing what it is that I do every day, how my classes work, why I do what I do, and just kind of focus on some of the highlights and the platforms that I use. So it's eminently practical. I mean, it's made for people in this space, whether, you run a homeschool or you're a computer science middle school teacher, or you run a camp, or anywhere in that space where you're trying to help kids to code. And I'm not saying this is the only way to do anything, but I do believe that it's practical enough that anybody reading this could pick up something that they could use tomorrow in their class or their camp. And so that's kind of what I put out. So it's called Hard Fun. And the subtitle is Supercharge Your Middle School Computer Science Classroom with project-based, hands-on, just-in-time learning. That's a mouthful. But anyway, so if you know any of the backstory and the people in this field, then Hard Fun is something that I stole from Seymour Papert, one of my heroes, who I consider kind of the godfather of kids and coding, even back in the 70s at MIT. Somebody that worked with him said that he didn't actually come up with that. It was one of his students who did that, which I thought, now that's interesting. Because I guess Seymour had asked him, is this fun? And one of the students said, it's hard fun. And I thought, that nails it. That's become my mantra. Every quarter, I have my kids quarterly. Day one, we have the intro to the class and how things run. And I always promise them, I said, this is going to be hard fun. And I say, it's fun because you'll be doing cool, engaging projects that you love, and you're going to really want to do them. And it's hard because it's not always easy to get things working the way you want them to work. But I can guarantee you're going to have that combination of both of them. I guess in a word, that's what it's about. So the book is available on Amazon, print, ebook, and also you can read it for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. I just wrote about what I do. And people ask me, was it hard to write the book? And I always say no, because it just kind of wrote itself, honestly, because it's just what I do every day in my class. It's how my classes run, what I think, what the kids say, what I'm looking for when I choose platforms, how I present material, what I expect, how I assess things. I didn't have to do any research at all, which is kind of nice. I just talked about how it works and tried to organize it in a fashion that would be accessible to other people. So it's kind of exciting to finally push it over the finish line and have it out there. And yeah, so Hard Fun by Bob Irving. And it really is, even though that the subtitle is a mouthful, that Supercharging Your Middle School Computer Science Classroom with project-based, hands-on, just-in-time learning, I really think that exactly encapsulates what the book is about.
And what are the titles of each of the chapters?
Well, I've kind of broken it down. I didn't make the titles quite as long. So I have intro and pedagogy, and then I've just done it kind of mostly by the platforms that I use. just the backstory, I teach grades 5 through 8. That's what our middle school is at our school. And every student in middle school must take computer science for 1 quarter, which means that you get the entire range of student interest and ability. I think that's really a good thing because everybody gets exposed to it, but it also means, you have to pitch it a little bit differently than you might if it were an elective. Because if you do an elective, you have, the nerd herd is always going to sign up for everything. And then you're going to go in a different direction. But, I have kids that don't know how to turn a computer on, an actual desktop computer. They don't know how to turn it off. They don't know how to log in. They don't know how to use a keyboard and a mouse, things like that. I mean, they're tablet kids or phone kids. So it's kind of new to them. So anyway, so I have my intro in pedagogies, chapter 1, then I have a chapter on Scratch, one on robotics, one on the Raspberry Pi, one on physical computing, Minecraft, Sonic Pi, Kodu, processing, from blocks to text. How do you make that shift? What I call Mython, which is Minecraft and Python. And then the last one is called Voice and Choice, which kind of wraps up the approach, which is I'm a big believer in giving students as much voice and choice in what they do as possible. So those are the chapter headings. Not real exciting, but that's what they are.
Well, let's dive deep into like a chapter, if you wouldn't mind, to give like a sense of what someone might expect to learn from a particular topic.
I'll talk about Minecraft. And this is kind of my current fave. So I talk a little bit about how I got introduced to Minecraft. And, it's such an institution now. I started back in 2013, which was 2 years, I think, after it started. And I kept hearing my students talk about this game, this Minecraft all the time. This weird language about finding diamonds. And, I'd say, what's this Minecraft thing? And, they were all excited. I mean, and the weird thing that I noticed when I asked a question like, what's this Minecraft thing? Is you to be boys, girls, gender didn't matter, color didn't matter. You can have kids who are like the super nerdy types versus the super, athletic types, everybody. And I thought I owe it to myself to figure out what is this Minecraft thing? I talk about downloading it and looking at it and thinking, what the heck is going on? Here we are in the 21st century with these 8-bit blocky graphics.
Right.
I didn't get it. I thought, you got 3D photorealistic games available, and these kids are going crazy over this block, kind of ugly game. So I thought that's really something. What is going on here? And so, I just I detail my journey in trying to learn more about it. So I enlisted the help of some experts, namely, my students, and I said, help me with this, walk me through it. And I had kids volunteer to stay after school to help Mr. Irving, navigate his way around, and it was touching in a way because there were kids that, they weren't always at the top of the class academically, but boy, they knew their way around Minecraft. And the other cool thing that I found was that they were so willing to help and so patient with me because I wasn't getting it. Until you learn, WASD and the mouse and, jumping and crouching and braking and all that kind of stuff, it's a little obtuse.
Yep.
And they were super, no, it's not like that. And they could have been a lot meaner than they were, but they were very patient with me and helping with it. But anyway, so then I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a Minecraft club. So I detail all this in the chapter. And so I asked for volunteers to beta test this. So I got this edition. Some of your listeners will remember Minecraft EDU, which was a kind of a mod of Java-based Minecraft back in the day that they made for schools and for teachers. And so I got Minecraft EDU and got it installed on our school server. And I bought some licenses. And I said, I just need a few beta testers to see if this is really going to work. And, instantly I had, 15 or 20 kids volunteer. And I said, well, now the tricky part is you're going to miss recess because that's the only time in the day where we can do it. So after lunch, I got 15 of them. They were, fighting each other to get into the room, happily giving up recess and playing. I had this aha moment. I thought, if I can't figure out a way to harness this energy and enthusiasm in my classes, then I need to have my teaching license revoked because I had never seen anything like this. There's something magical. I don't know how to explain it, you know? So as a computer science teacher, I started thinking, so how can we do coding in Minecraft? And so the chapter is kind of how that worked and all the different things that I went through to kind of figure out how to use this. Well, here it is, whatever, almost 10 years later, still using it. Minecraft has evolved. Minecraft EDU is no more. It got bought by Microsoft. And I remember the day I saw that headline and I really thought my heart was going to stop. I thought, it says, Microsoft buys Minecraft for 2.5 billion or whatever it was. But the thing that got my attention was Microsoft bought it. And back in that day, that was like hearing, like the Death Star had just, hovered over your planet. That's, I think Microsoft actually now is a very forward-looking company.
Yeah.
And really with it. And I think this proves it. But at the time I thought, oh God, they're going to suck all the life out of it. They're going to try to monetize it. They're going to make it, it's going to destroy this indie game, that we've all come to know and love. And fortunately, it turns out that's not the case. So I had some good discussions at conferences with some of the Microsoft people, and they told me they were under strict instructions. They said, do not mess with the DNA of Minecraft. And they were all given, I can't remember what the book was. It might have been Notch's book or somebody about the beginnings of Minecraft and what it was. And they were told, don't fool with that because that's the black box. We know that is working all the time. So that made me feel a little bit better. And I think it has borne out to me anyway, that now with Education Edition, they've got a good plan. So I've been able to use Education Edition in my classes ever since. And so I talk a lot about, how we do that. And they incorporated coding with their Make Code environment. So you get some block-based coding with the agent, who's this little robot dude who, you can code him to move around and build and all kinds of cool stuff like that. It's very computer sciencey. They actually added Python, which I was really excited about because at first they only offered JavaScript. And I thought, I actually, so I said to anybody who was listening at Microsoft, I said, please, not JavaScript is the first text-based language. I get that it's important and it's everywhere, but please, can we do Python?
Yeah.
I don't think it was because I was asking, but, I think in the last 2 years, they did incorporate Python, which I was very happy to see. Yeah, so I just talk about that. And the other thing that I touch on briefly here in the chapter is the whole thing of command block. It's text-based code in the 3D world of Minecraft. And to me, that's the coolness, which is, you can move around your build and look at it from every angle. You can see it. You're inhabiting the three-dimensional world where your code is executing. And if you think about that, that is off the charts awesome, because everything else, you're on a 2D screen and you see something happen after you run, your code. And, that's pretty satisfying. There's no question. But if you actually inhabit the same world and you as a player and the coder are interacting with the code, it really is supremely magical. I do a lot, and I hope to do a lot more with command blocks. So for instance, I do a mini game in 6th grade, and I say, you can build your own mini game, at least 5 different command blocks. I give them the beginner commands like teleport and give and summon and stuff like that. And so that unleashes their creativity in an environment that most of them are familiar with. Not everybody has played Minecraft, but I always ask them, have you been like living under a rock or something? How did you get to be in 6th grade and not have played Minecraft before?
Yeah.
I'm just joking with them. But I mean, you do wonder. They were doing other stuff. That's fine, but anyway, it's the combination to me. And I guess this, in a way, it's a good chapter to start with because it really encapsulates a lot of my approach and my pedagogy, which is, big projects, hands-on, just-in-time learning, which means I don't do a lot of prep to say, okay, now today class, we're going to talk about, variables, or we're going to talk about this. Middle schoolers they really don't want to hear me talk. I've just had to accept that. I think I'm a really interesting person, but they don't. They could care less. And it's what they want to do, but they know, they're chomping at the bit. I have a saying in my class. It's an acronym, which is pronounced HOKEF, HOKEF, which stands for hands off the keyboard, eyes front. And one of my middle school students years ago said, you should use something like this. And so I've incorporated that, but it's really hard to get them to get their hands off the keyboard and their eyes front when Minecraft is right in front of them. And I know I can't compete. So I do as little prep work as possible. I say, here's what you're going to do. Here are some suggestions for the kind of mini games you can build. You could do a parkour or a maze or, an escape room or whatever. And here's how you're going to be graded. You need to know these command blocks and how to use them. Now, I support that. I mean, this is where the just-in-time learning comes in. I have a YouTube channel, Crouching Python, and I've made videos for all the places where I know my kids get stuck. So I say, you can go, you want to learn how to do the fill command? I've got a really good video on that. So go to YouTube, look me up, watch the video. The other thing I've learned is that when I started doing the videos, I was under the assumption that they would be happy to do that. But I'm finding that even at 5 minutes, my videos are probably too long. So I need to go more like a TikTok length, or YouTube shorts, 35 seconds or whatever. But that's why I can do this just-in-time learning, because I have support materials there. And when they want to know, how do you do this? Then I have some material to point them to. I mean, there's different ways to approach it. I could front load it and I can say, now here's how you do this command, a fill command, a give command, a summon command, a teleport command, and an effect command. And I could have them watch me demonstrate it.
Right.
But they don't really want to do that. I don't blame them, because it's abstract at that point. It has no context for what they're trying to do. Whereas if I say, when it's time, here's a resource, that's the teachable moment. That's when they want to know, how do you do this? And they're begging me. I mean, how many classes do you get to teach where your kids are begging you to tell you something that you want them to know?
Right.
I think, we started with Minecraft, but that really encapsulates, in a lot of ways, my entire teaching philosophy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's interesting hearing you reflect on making a short version of your videos. So I've been doing a lot of streaming of myself playing video games, and then also myself, how I practice the drums. And I've been, in the mornings when I work out, I will review the videos and just press M to add a marker in Premiere, and then I'll go back and I'll turn those into a short clip. Some of the clips that I end up making, they have to be under a minute to be a YouTube short or to go on Instagram, or TikTok's now expanded it. But that 1 minute limit that you have, it really makes you figure out what is the most important thing. So far, the longest video that I've compressed into a minute was a 20-minute segment of myself playing Elden Ring. And I had to make it into a 1 minute, little funny, here's myself, doing something in the game. And to think about, whether it's the entertainment kind of stuff, with video games, or the instructional stuff that I'm doing with the drumming, to condense something into such a short excerpt is a really good process. At least I feel like it's been fun to learn how to do those kind of edits.
Well, I guess that's my next challenge, is to do that. As a teacher, I like to say, now here's why, this is how it works, this is why you need to know, because that's the way my mind works. A lot of people can tell me, well, you just do this. And my next question always is, yeah, but why? Why does that work like that? Because I want to know, because that's the way my brain works, is, so if that works like that, I get it now. And then I can expand it to something else. And I think that is valuable at times. There's no question that has value, but at certain times for certain people, it's good, but, probably not always. I find what most of my students want to know is, yeah, but how do you do it?
Yep.
Tell me, in 15 seconds, how do you do this? Actually, I've learned, yeah, I can. And they're like, okay, good. And then just go on. They've learned what they needed to know. The other thing that I do in my classes, and if you were to come to my class and see it in action, I think that it looks chaotic. No matter what grade, everybody's working on something different in that, even if they're, let's say 7th grade, we do scratch games. Well, everybody's got their own game, right? And they're all at necessarily in different spots in their game and what they're doing.
Yep.
So how, as a teacher, do you manage, well, it's MBWA, managed by walking around. I mean, so I got my room set up now so that all of the desks are on the outside of the room facing the outside walls.
Yep.
And I wander around in the middle to see what I can help people with. And then the other cool thing is that, so somebody figures out how to do something, somebody's got the fill command down. I know they've got it. They've demonstrated it. I go to the next person over and they say, how do you do a fill command? And I say, well, you need to ask, Emily, because she's just figured it out. And then I can walk on to the next person. And then Emily becomes the expert. And maybe Emily came in not feeling like she knew anything about coding and she wasn't good at it. And she's not a Minecrafter, not a gamer, blah, blah, blah. But all of a sudden, she's the expert on the fill command. That can kind of proliferate throughout the class. So you don't have to be the expert, but you do have to know. You can't just let kids go and just figure it out. I'm not a believer in that, but I do think that, I had this quotation from Seymour Papert on my board once that said something like, the job of a teacher is not to instill knowledge, but to create an atmosphere where learning is maximized. Something like that. I'm sure I'm not getting it right because I'm just pulling off the top of my head here, but I believe that. And in my classrooms, I've worked very hard to create that atmosphere where learning is maximized. So I'm not the expert, even though I probably do know the answers to all of them. And sometimes I'll tell them and sometimes I won't, which is, that's okay too. It depends.
Yeah, to be able to engage in like that productive struggle, I think it can be very beneficial for students to figure out and think through things and whatnot. I am curious, like, how has your understanding or approach in the classroom changed? Because like when we last spoke, it was like in 2019, and that just seems like forever ago. We're recording this in 2022, and even though it was only a couple years ago, like so much has changed. Like what has been reinforced for you, or like what has shifted in your understandings over the last couple of years?
Those are really good questions. And it does seem like that was in another age, doesn't it? Oh my God. So in the meantime, what happened, I taught a year remotely, which a lot of people did. My school, because I'm in a high risk category, my school they got an in-class monitor. So my classes were still meeting in person, but I Zoomed in every day for a year. So that meant a couple of things. One thing was it meant that I couldn't as easily manage by walking around, although, you've got breakout rooms in Zoom and I use those a lot. But the other thing was that I couldn't use, because you probably remember at the height of the pandemic, we didn't know what the transmission mode was. And so all of my Windows computers were packed away, and my students, they have iPads, their own individual iPads. And I had to revamp my entire curriculum. My curriculum was, based on my computers.
Yep.
So that meant, robotics with people out of their seats and bumping into each other and handling, Lego pieces. That was out. Raspberry Pis, no.
Yep.
Microbits, no. And even the computers, no. It forced me to think, okay, now what are the big things that I want them to know? And how can I do that on these little devices with the iPad? And so I revamped my entire curriculum from 5th through 8th grade. So that was one thing. It had to be basically either an app or web-based, and it had to work well on iPad. Not everything, works well web-based on iPads that you might think, So the one thing I did was it made me stop and think, so what are the big ones, that I want to make sure? I divided everything that I did into 4 basic categories. I said, I've got game design, robotics, physical computing, which would be like, Raspberry Pis and microbits, and creative computing, which would be something like processing, art and code, or music and code, like with Sonic Pi. So I said, I want to make sure that in pretty much every year or every other year, I'm going to hit all of those things. And then I thought, well, now what can I do that's going to be web-based that they can do on their iPads? So for instance, I went to virtual robotics from Bex, which is great. I was super impressed with that. Was it as good as them holding the robots in their physical hands and building them and having them on the floor? No, I don't think so. But, you still have a lot of the same functionality and, it's the same kind of thing. So that was one huge change. The other change that happened since then and during then, and I can't remember where I read it, but somebody said this generation, to step back from our curriculum and all of that, this generation is experiencing something on a global scale that none of us has ever experienced. A global health crisis, a pandemic with millions of people dying and living with the fear and uncertainty of how does this work? And, what is my future going to be? And, all of that. And I've been around a long time. I have nothing in my history to compare with that. Nothing. The most traumatic thing, this is really going to date me, but I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis and being on the playground and hearing planes go overhead and thinking, oh my God, this is it, But that was just like one day. These kids have lived with this for years now. So it seems to me as a teacher, I don't think we can just go back to business as usual. And I think there's been a huge push from, whatever, all of the invested parties, not all of them, but most of them, to get back to normal. Well, first of all, I'm not convinced that whatever was normal before was optimum.
Right.
I'm definitely not convinced about that. And secondly, I don't think we can just act like nothing ever happened.
Right.
So I suppose now to bring this back to my classes, how it changed, I think I'm doing more stuff that I know is immediately engaging and fun, to use the F word with kids, because I really think, I don't know if there's anything to back me up on this, but, social emotional learning or something like that. These kids have really been through more than we have as adults at a young age. And that has an impact. And we won't know probably for years what that impact is, and it will be, but there's no question it's done that. Now, I'm in the independent school world, so our big word is rigor. Everything's got to be rigorous, which, who even knows what that means? But anyway, I don't think that in my expectations for what students can do, I'm any less rigorous than I was, but I'm more inclined, and I've always been inclined to do stuff that I think is fun and engaging. I'm more inclined to do stuff that's even more fun and more engaging because I don't know. So I'm doing more Minecraft than I did before. I'm not even sure I can say why, but there is something about that game that it's magical. It's so engaging, and it engages their creative selves and their thinking selves and their adventurous selves and everything in a way that I just don't see in other places. And again, if I can harness that, whatever that is, and use it in my classes, then I'm definitely going to do that. I think that's one thing that I've noted is that, and maybe it's just a nod to kids and saying, look, I know it's been rough. I can't even imagine, so we're going to do some really fun stuff. Now I'm still going to sneak in what I call stealth learning. You're going to be learning stuff. And you're still going to get assessed, here's the rubric. But along the way, somebody once, I was on some Zoom chat where somebody said, never waste a crisis. And I feel like we had a crisis. I think in education, we had a moment where everything was up for grabs. I feel like we kind of wasted that crisis because I think everybody was so eager to get back to normal. And I understand that because everything was upended. But we could have had a new normal come out of this. It could have made us rethink, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And I think one of the things you and I talked a little bit about this is this whole concept of learning loss that you hear people talking about.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I think these kids have had learning leaps because they have learned more about life than I did, way more than I ever did at that age. So maybe they're a little bit behind on their, whatever. I think, it is important they get their math skills and their reading skills and everything else up to where it should be. But let's not dismiss what they've been through and talk like, oh, and now we have to really ratchet it up to get them caught up. I think that's a recipe for disaster. But what do you think?
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree. Like before we even started recording, we were talking about like the differences between like compound and complex sentence. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like I've written like a dozen publications, received some awards even for some of them. And like, I don't even know what a compound or a complex sentence is. Like, is that really the most important thing that we need to focus on? Or perhaps like to vamp off of what you're saying, maybe we should focus on being able to express yourself through a medium that just happens to be writing through text, and like then use that as a springboard for learning. So you're learning more about yourself and your own interests as opposed to focusing on like menial little benchmarks that are assessed and whatnot.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. So the long answer to a short question, I have a lot more, I don't know what it is, sympathy or whatever for kids that have had to deal with this. And I think they've been real champs, all the ones that I know that I work with. I'm just astounded. Now, I think clearly, there's some things that happen that they're going to need help with later on, I think. I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be 11 years old and have to live through something like that and think about that. Maybe you have, relatives or loved ones who lost their lives, or you were worried about them getting sick. That's going to do a number on you. And you're going to have to somehow, I'm not a psychologist, but you're going to have to work through that, make it part of your existence. But let's not denigrate that. So, in answer to how the pandemic changed me and my teaching, that would be one thing right there.
Let's say at the end of this recording, like you get a knock on your door and then you open it up and there's a little package from Amazon. And you open it up and inside is a magic wand. And with this magic wand, you could reimagine education in any way, just at the flick of the wand. Like, what changes would you make with that?
Oh my God. I mean, I don't really feel qualified to say what should happen in, every grade, every subject, every discipline. I can't say that. But I'll tell you what I would love to see is a switch to more learning by doing and doing things that mean something to you. In a lot of my classes, I kind of end off with a passion project, which, I didn't invent, but I say you start with something that you care about. Passion's a tough term to use with middle schoolers sometimes. So I use the word interest, something that you're really interested in, It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a video game. It could be soccer. It could be, animal safety, healthy eating. I don't care. It doesn't have to be even an issue that you want to see change. And start from there. And then let's say you pick Minecraft or you pick something else, and you're going to build something that's going to reflect your interest and your passion. Well, why couldn't most education be something like that, where I create stuff that means something to me? It's all so abstract. And I think after a while, the kids know how to game the system. If they're interested, it becomes about chasing the grades so they can get it, all of that. Maybe I see it more in my school because an independent school is very, focused on one particular approach and one particular destination. I would love to see some of that. I'd love to see us do more as Finland does. I always think, no homework, really? And you're still at the top of the standardized testing? How does that work? But clearly they're doing something, I would love to see that. I'm one of those lifelong learners that every school says their mission is to create lifelong learners. I've yet to find a school that didn't say that was their mission, to create lifelong learners. Well, I think that every school that I've been associated with is failing miserably, because the joy of learning, which I think is a real thing, and I'm not saying it's all fun, it's hard fun.
Right.
It's disappeared. I mean, I see it by the time kids get into sixth grade. You just show up, you either do or don't do what's expected, and you endure the day, and then you get out and you go do the stuff you want to do. I mean, so it's kind of sad in a way. So if I had a magic wand, I guess I would wave it so that we got excited about the stuff that we were learning. And maybe it's because we had a voice and choice in what we learn. I don't mean that if you really you're not feeling like you want to learn the multiplication tables, that you get to skip them, or anything like that. I do think that there has to be a way to individualize, I guess, education more. You've read it all, we're in the factory model, the industrial revolution model of school is still very much in play, right?
So if a teacher's listening to this and they're like, yeah, I totally agree, I love that, what's something that they could actually do to try and enact those kind of changes in their own classroom?
I'll tell you what, a lot of people, and I've heard this from, people that I work, around, they say, and even if they don't say it, I know they're thinking it. Well, it's easy for you to have fun, engaging projects because you teach computers, and kids love computers. And they're all good at them. And of course, my first thought is, A, they're not all good at computers. If you've been in my classroom, you'd know that. B, they don't all love computers. And C, before I taught computer science, I taught English and history. So I know for a fact that in other disciplines and subjects, you can do an approach like this. Now, I'm not saying everything can be like that, but what I would say is start small. Do something, one lesson, one a month, one a week, whatever, and just try it, learn what you can about it and open it up and then try it. And, you'll fail because we all fail the first time we do anything, then kind of reassess, what worked, what didn't work. And that's how I came up with this program that I'm currently using. I mean, there was a lot of fails along the way when I thought something this is going to be killer. And it crashed and burned on the runway, or the opposite. So I would say start small. There's a lot of resources out there to learn about things like project-based learning or, call it what you will. If it works for a lesson, try a unit. Okay? This 3-week unit where we're going to be studying whatever, we're going to do it like this. So you don't change your expectations. You don't change your outcomes that you want, but you're going to change your methodology for how you're going to try to get there. And that means probably you're going to have to assess it differently because, we're used to we teach the way that we were taught, most of us.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people say I could never do that. I mean, that would be impossible in my, teaching whatever I teach and what grade. Well, it might be impossible to do the whole thing. I mean, my entire curriculum is like this. That's the way I do it. But I'm not afraid if somebody needs direct instruction or it's clear that whatever I'm doing isn't working and the whole class needs direct instruction, I'll stop and do it. I mean, I'm not married to any particular pedagogy to the exclusion of everything else. I just know that this way works the best for everybody almost all the time. But, I'll do that. So, I think just be brave enough to try it. So I went back to school to learn coding. Like I taught English and history for the first part of my career. I went back to school, and the school that I went to was a 10-month intense, you had to be a college graduate to get in. And they were upskilling us and this will date this, but this was for the .com boom, if you remember back that far when everything was just, and I'd been a teacher and I was in a boarding school. I was kind of burnt out from teaching, frankly. And I thought, well, if I do this, then I can shift over to, the tech field and I will be making millions of dollars and, all of that. And by the time we graduated, the bloom was off the rose and the .com bubble was bursting. But the thing that I took with me, though, besides the skills of coding and databases and all that kind of stuff, was the way they taught us. In this particular school, I remember they got us all in the room, all of us grown-ups, the first day, and they said that everything that we teach you, this is what the guy in charge said, everything we teach you will be obsolete in 3 years. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, we're spending a lot of money. It was about 30 grand for 1 year of learning obsolete material.
Yep.
But he said, in this field, things change all the time. He said, I'm going to list the technologies that we taught 5 years ago. And he started listing, programming languages and databases and all this stuff. He said, are you familiar with them? Nobody had heard of them. Oh, he said, but what we're going to teach you is we're going to teach you how to continually teach yourself so that no matter what happens, no matter how the technology changes, you will have learned a way of learning that will stand you in good stead because it's always going to change. That was one of the things that attracted me to technology because I taught English and Hamlet had never changed, ever. As much as I love Hamlet. But, you didn't think, oh, how are we going to do it next year when it's all different? It was never different. It was always the same, and you could get deeper into it, and, but that wasn't like this. We worked in teams creating real world applications. We did have, part of the day was direct instruction where they quote unquote taught us things about, programming languages or databases and things like that. But then the rest of the day, you were working in your team building something that had to use what you were, quote unquote, learning. And inevitably, and you know how it is, you get to something that they didn't cover and you have to figure out, so how do I do that though? Because they talked about this, but they didn't talk about that. And so we didn't have teachers the way they called them facilitators. That should have been my first clue, So you would ask the facilitator, they would kind of go from team room to team room. And you would say, look, hey, we're stuck with this thing here. We can't make this work. The database isn't connecting or, something's wrong. What do we do? And invariably the answer was, I don't know. Where do you think would be a good place to go to try to get some help for that? So after a while, we kind of stopped asking because we knew we were going to get that response. Now they did say, that's part of the plan. We're doing that on purpose. And they promised us, look, if you're at the point where everybody in the room, you're either going to kill each other or, somebody's in tears, call us. We will hold your hand through it, But other than that, look at your resources, all of your team members, all the materials you have, the internet, other, and figure it out. So I teach the way I am taught. So I brought that kind of pedagogy with me into computer science when I moved to computer science. Now, middle schoolers are different from adults in that they have very little patients and are more easily frustrated. So I'm not quite as just figure it out and don't ask me any questions, but I do allow them to struggle, and I do provide resources and they're surrounded. I always tell them, look, there's people all around you that know how to do this. Ask, get out of your seat and say, who knows how to do a timer in Scratch? Who knows? And somebody's going to raise their hand and say, I know. Okay, go help them, And now you're the expert too. So it works like that. So I kind of feel like if they could have professional development where they would have to make stuff with minimal instruction that meant something to them, and you give them a few tools, maybe whatever, a programming language, this or that, whatever, and say, create something, I have a feeling that they'd be much more inclined to try it in the classroom. They have to go through it. You have to struggle through it and see that, oh yeah, that actually works. I can do this. And then you have the confidence you can help your students when they're kind of stuck. So you don't have to be the fount of all wisdom.
Yeah, I like that. It was interesting hearing you mention that part of the reason why you went into CS was because you were getting burned out in education. One of the questions that I've been asking more frequently since we last did an interview is like, how do you stave off the burnout that can come with working in a very demanding field? So I'm curious for you, what would be that answer? Like, what do you do to kind of take care of yourself?
That's interesting, because I guess to go back to what we were talking about before, it's not just our students who've gone through this global pandemic and are, carrying the scars, but those of us who I think society realized are frontline workers now. I mean, a lot of people, and I'm sure you've talked to them, they're scarred. They've been caught between, all these conflicting demands and political and, whatever, expectations and health fears and all that kind of stuff. So I'll tell you one thing that I don't think is really that helpful is to provide wellness programs at your school. And I've seen a lot of that. We're just going to teach you to do mindfulness. And I'm a big believer in meditation and mindfulness, big believer in it. But I don't think that's the way you handle people who are experiencing this kind of burnout. I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. But again, it's a systemic thing where we have, the factories already set up. We're trying to jam people through this. It's so inhumane in a way. The whole system is inhumane. I mean, fortunately, it's staffed with people like you and me that have gone into teaching. We're not doing it to get rich. We're doing it because we love learning and we like kids and we want to make the world a better place, right? That's really tricky. And especially in our field, in the CS field, how are you going to attract teachers when they're not going to get 2 or 3 times what they would get paid teaching, plus have all of these other, duties and responsibilities and expectations? I don't know. I think it, requires systemic reform. I don't know how that's going to happen, I'll be honest.
Are there any other approaches or tools like meditation that you use to help yourself?
Yeah, there is. Music. Now that's me. That's my personal thing. But I always tell people I have a musical alter ego. His name is Chicago Bob, and he plays blues guitar. This is my passion musically, is learning about this kind of music and learning to play it. So during the pandemic, I actually set up a weekly Facebook Live event where I played music, half an hour. I called it the Southern Comfort Sessions, or, I said, to make of it what you will. But it was a way for me to express that and connect with people. I mean, it's a personal note. It was amazing for me because I was able to keep in touch with family and friends, former students even, and, friends that I hadn't seen in decades, and we were able to connect through this, live music in the midst of this craziness that we're all experiencing. And I told somebody the other day, to me, that's like oxygen. Can a school facilitate it for their teachers to follow passions? Didn't Google used to have their 25%? You spend a quarter of your time just following something that you're really jazzed about. Now we're talking crazy, I'm sure. But I mean, if you really want to see people make it, and people are leaving the profession in droves,
yeah,
they are burning out.
There's actually a podcast that I'll include a link to in the show notes. It's with Laura DeSenza. And so she actually talks about how she took that time that was modeled in companies like Google. They called it the genius hour, where it was time for you to explore whatever you want in the classroom. So if people want to hear more about that, I'll include a link to that in the show notes. But it's a brilliant idea. Let's
make the learning experience as humane as we possibly can for all the participants. I mean, that's the way I try to run my class. So I have this little, my classroom within the context of my middle school, within the context of my school.
Right.
I don't have complete control. I can't just go and do whatever I want, but I've been very fortunate, the freedom to kind of structure it and run it the way that I want to. And it does reflect my personality, which, any pedagogy should. But that's humane, I think, by definition, isn't it? had one kid, they said, "Can we call you Chicago Bob?" My answer is, yeah, if you see me playing somewhere, but here in the classroom, I'm Mr. Irving. But I mean, I had one eighth grader last week say, "I looked up some of your Facebook stuff, the Chicago Bob stuff. That was really cool." Uh-oh. Hope I didn't say anything inappropriate, but
Yeah.
if kids can see you as an actual human being,
Yeah.
and you can relate to them that way, I don't know. There's something magical about that. And I think the whole system is not designed for that to happen.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's getting less and less humane. I mean, you tell me, Jared, because I think you're more in touch with this than I am. But, when you have, actual curriculum that you have to follow day by day and scripts you're supposed to read from and things like that, well, you could clearly get a robot to do that. You wouldn't need a human being to.
And that's where one of my former districts was heading with their PE department. They would put on a recording of like the instruction, and then it was the PE teacher's job to just walk around and check on posture and technique while doing the movements. But they were basically just watching, like, I don't know, recording of Zumba, for example. And so the students would just follow along with that. So there was like zero customization. All 50 plus elementary schools were doing the exact same thing on the exact same day. So it's just like, where is the humanity in that? But your point about like being human as an educator, that is like, I would frequently talk with kids about, oh yeah, what's your favorite anime? Oh, well, here's mine. Or like, oh yeah, what video games do you play? Oh, well, here's what I play. And like recently, even on social media, I started sharing, hey, I stream video games. Hey, I play drums a lot, like, and sharing all the successes and failures with that. But yeah, I hear you about the fear of like students and like, oh, what did I say? Which is like every time I stream, I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I'm family friendly. I'm not swearing when I'm on there. Cause like for all I know, a little like 5-year-old might stumble across my content. I want to make sure that it's appropriate for them.
Well, I think that's so cool because I think they know you're a human being and I think they'll relate to you as a human being. And then in one sense, you kind of gain their trust. I mean, especially I think in, middle school, the old saying is that you teach students more than you teach subjects. I mean, you do teach subjects, but you have to connect with these people as people and earn the right to be heard. And I think you do that by respecting them as unique individuals. It doesn't mean that anything goes. It doesn't mean that you just say, yeah, whatever, but it does mean that you listen to them. Like, what's your favorite anime, And I always find students are like astonished. They say, you have a YouTube channel? I say, yeah, of course. Like, who doesn't,
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
I always say that. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Down I don't know. I remember as a kid thinking my teachers were like vampires, in the sense that when they weren't in school, they were sleeping in a coffin somewhere, like it's just the opposite. They were up there in the daytime. I remember once seeing one of my teachers at the grocery store, and I was in elementary school thinking, what the heck?
Yeah.
What are you doing here? That's what I thought. It's like, how can you be shopping for groceries? I had no sense of them as human beings. And I think it's often the case, I don't have a magic wand and other people who study this would be much better at proposing changes than I would be. We're going to have a system. Let's at least make it a humane system that, respects our individuality and our differences and our beliefs and whatever, And I think if we can start there and build up, I think you get buy-in. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah.
You get buy-in from students. They'll do anything for you. I do want to say, I met somebody who was a new school principal, and they said they would no longer allow any discussion in the faculty room that started with kids today. We're not doing that, because kids today are so, but I always feel like, you always hear the kids today they don't know the value of work, and I always say, have you ever seen them play a game? Are you kidding me? When they have an objective that they want to meet? Well, I haven't played Elden Ring, but I've watched enough videos on it to know that it's not going to work for me because I will get killed, so many times. I'll just say, well, that was the worst $50 I ever spent.
It's part of the process, Bob.
Oh my God. I don't know. Life's too short. If somebody wants to get past that particular bad guy or that boss, they will do it over and over and over again. And they'll learn as they're going, right? They'll figure out, okay, that didn't work, but maybe this will work. So they're using the creative minds. They're learning, and if they're playing, collaboratively, then they're, working out, okay, you do this, I'll do this. We'll do,
Yep.
there's all kinds of learning going. They're not afraid of hard work. They are not afraid of doing stuff that's hard. They're not lazy. But if you give them stuff that's not engaging, if they don't feel like you care about them as people, if the stuff that you're presented in a boring fashion and it's kind of rote, I'd be lazy too.
Yeah.
In fact, I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, at the start of our conversation, you mentioned that this will be your last year full-time in the classroom. What are your plans for the future?
Well, gosh, it's a work in progress, but I love the learning space. That is what gets me up in the morning. I live for the aha moments when the light goes on and they're like, yes, I get it. That's what I love doing. And I want to continue doing that. I'm sure I'm going to be in some online space somewhere. So I'm talking with some people. Might be some opportunities, maybe some online courses, 5 classes a day, plus all the attendant, everything else that you have. It's just, it's time to change. But
yeah,
I'm in a very fortunate position in that I actually do love like 85% of what I do. I love it, and I love being, at that intersection of learning and technology and kids and cool stuff. And that's just too much fun. I can't give that up, but it's probably going to move to another platform.
Are there any questions or topics that we haven't discussed that you'd like to chat about?
Well, I'd like to hear, what do you think about the future of not just education, but CS education? You're in this space, you're more plugged in than I am with all the different things that are going on. And, it seems like we're definitely getting some traction. What do you see in the future?
I think we're going to have some really in-depth conversations about, it's not just about doing CS in the classroom. It's also about how you do it and how frequently you do it. So we have quite the range of implementation, whether it's a standalone computer science class like mine was in the K-8 school that I was at. It was a mandatory class for every student to learn how to program all throughout, not an elective. It's like you go to your music class, you go to your art class, you'd also go to your coding class, etc. That is a very different approach than, hey, let's just integrate it through computational thinking so we can check off some of these standards and we'll do it in our ELA class. So depending on how it's implemented, it's going to have a significant impact on how much time you can actually spend learning the subject area and to what depth and degree. And then, if it's integrated and it's this watered down computational thinking version of computer science and not actually learning how to code or learning how to create through the things you are learning, it's going to create a new equity issue in terms of, okay, but how much of it do you actually understand? If we feel like this is something that everybody needs to know, okay, well, we're implementing in such drastically different ways that the outcomes are going to be night and day. And so as a field, we need to really discuss how frequently it's actually done and then how it's done along the continuum of implementation.
That's pretty interesting. I'm just thinking our CS program, everybody has to take it grades 5 through 9. And then after 9th grade, you can apply to be in the program. I think just last year, and we're kind of a boy-heavy school traditionally, we've gotten to the point where we have a majority of females in the program. And I think one of the reasons why is it's, what I do, voice and choice and following your passions and all that, that's exactly what they do in the upper school. They're using different platforms like VR coding and, cool stuff like that. And it's hard, again, because they're creating their own thing. There's no template to follow, they're programming in Unity and you have to make it do something that you want it to do that nobody's ever done before. I guess if I were in one of your deep conversations, I would be not on the side of incorporating computational thinking into ELA.
Yeah. Whenever a district asks for my honest opinions on things, I will frequently bring up okay, you're basically asking students to learn a brand new language or maybe even a musical instrument. And if you give them 1 hour per quarter on this thing and you don't actually give them the instrument to play with, or you don't actually teach them, I don't know, the Japanese that they're going to use, how do you think that's going to end up for them if they experience this for 9 years like they would in the K-8 schools that I work with? It would not go well. But if instead, every single week you are keep going back into it, keep diving deep into it, and you actually gave them the instrument to play with, to practice, or the language to speak with and listen to, that's going to be extremely different. So if I stick with the instrument metaphor, like I want to actually give students the instrument to play with, and I want to give them the time to play with it and the resources to actually dive deep into actually getting good at it, not just playing the same 4 chords over and over once per quarter. Like that's going to get you nowhere.
And ultimately, is it a problem with scheduling too? I mean, there's just time constraints. And
Oh, certainly.
I mean, I know of one particular administrator who said in a meeting, I really think this whole computer science thing's a fad. It wasn't that long ago. And I thought, must be nice to live in that world, where I mean, all of the other subjects are already well established. Nobody's going to argue about, geometry or physics or social studies or French or math or whatever. So they've already staked out that part of, the day, and nobody's going to argue with that. So, I mean, it's funny. I don't know if you're familiar with I watched some of Gary Stager's stuff, very progressive. And, his answer is, how would you change schools? He said, throw out half the curriculum.
Yeah.
And he said, it doesn't even matter which half, just pick a half, throw it out. I mean, everybody, when you say that, everybody who has a vested interest is like, no, you can't do that because that'll throw out mine, where they need to know, blah, blah, but I mean, I always feel like I heard somewhere that Japanese math textbooks are like really, really thin, and ours are like doorstops, but they go really deep into just a few things, whereas our thing is let's just cover everything. And so as a result, they don't really understand a lot, but we've quote unquote covered stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if we think that computer science is going to be the last subject area that is suddenly going to be, hey, everybody needs to know this, like that is a mistake. So if we look forward 10, 20 years, like think about even just life skills, like things that you would learn from a therapist. I wish I learned the things that I learned from a therapist when I was going through school. That would have been nice to have that as a mandatory part of my curriculum. Okay, but what about even home economics stuff? Like whether it's like personal finances or even like learning how to cook. Those are things that I took classes on in middle school, but they weren't required. They are certainly things that I think would be beneficial for everyone. So why don't we add that? What about our personal health and whatnot in terms of like our physical, not just our mental, but like even health about how to be sanitary and whatnot? Like that clearly is something that is useful. Okay, well, if that's important, but what about like all the lack of like medical professionals that we've realized that we have in the last couple of years? If we think that is important, but what about the lack of chips that we've had that's preventing me from being able to purchase a car right now because of like our Prius being vandalized? Like there's so many things. It's like, no, this thing is now more important. Now this thing is now more important, etc. So if we just keep adding more and more, all we're going to end up doing is just diluting everything that students are learning. So my opinion also kind of aligns with Gary's is like, yeah, I mean, you can't learn everything. And if all we're going to do is just like skim on the surface of all these topics, like when are we actually going to develop expertise?
Good question. All of the interested parties get a little bit of what they want, and you can't argue against any of those things that you mentioned. They're all important.
So let's do it all. We'll do it all 5 minutes each every single day. It'll be great.
Oh my God. Oh.
So I guess the last question that I have is, where might people go to connect with you and the organizations that you work with?
Okay. Well, the organization that I work with is the Porter Gowd School in Charleston, South Carolina. It's going to be bittersweet to leave there because it's been great. They've been super supportive of the CS program that we've built there. Excited about that and the future that it holds there. My YouTube channel, I'm Crouching Python on YouTube. Capital C, capital P, no spaces, as I always tell my students, because there's somebody else that tried to steal it. On Twitter, I'm BIRV2, numeral 2. I'm boberv@gmail.com if anybody ever wants to email me. But, those are my coordinates, I guess. And I love talking with people about any of this stuff. I love it. I always have. I've always been that teacher who's got connections outside of the 4 walls of the school and always wants to, anybody that I see that's doing something cool, I always hit them up and say, oh, tell me about this. How'd you do it? What was involved in that? And, how can I get better at it? And I'm still learning. And if, people hear something that they hear me say that they have a question about, I would love, to chat with you about it. Happy to do it.
And with that, that concludes this week's episode of the CSK8 podcast. Friendly reminder that you can find Bob's contact information in the show notes at jaredoleary.com. So make sure you reach out to Bob. Stay tuned next week for another episode. And until then, I hope you're all staying safe and are having a wonderful week.